It's the 25th of June, 1978. You're in the Monumental Stadium in Buenos Aires, packed in with more than 70,000 people. Argentina have just won the World Cup for the first time in their history. The noise is unlike anything you've ever heard. Confetti rains down. Grown men are weeping with joy. It looks like the happiest place on earth. Now walk out of the stadium. Go about 10 blocks, less than a mile down the avenue. There's a cluster of buildings there called the Navy Mechanics School, the ESMA, and inside those walls, at this exact moment, political prisoners are being held by one of the most brutal military dictatorships in South American history. The prisoners can hear the stadium. Survivors would later describe it. The roar of the crowd after every goal, drifting through the walls of the place where they were being held and tortured. The greatest party in football, and one of the darkest places on the continent, less than a mile apart. At the same time, in the same city. This is the story of the 1978 World Cup, the tournament football tries hardest to forget. And it raises a question that still haunts the sport today. What happens when the biggest show on earth is hosted by a regime that's using it to hide its crimes? To understand 1978, you have to understand what Argentina was in 1978. 2 years earlier, in March 1976, the military had seized power in a coup, overthrowing the elected president and installing General Jorge Rafael Videla. What followed became known as the Dirty War, a campaign of state terror against anyone the regime considered an opponent. Students, journalists, trade unionists, activists, and often people who had simply been named by someone else under duress. The regime's signature method gave the Spanish language a new word, the desaparecidos. The disappeared. People were taken, often kidnapped in front of their own families, and simply never seen again. No arrest record, no trial, no body. Families spent years, decades, not knowing whether their sons and daughters were alive or dead. Human rights organizations estimate that between 15 and 30,000 people were disappeared or killed during the dictatorship's rule. And here's the detail that matters for our story. Argentina had been awarded the World Cup a decade earlier, long before the coup. So when the generals took power, they inherited the biggest sporting event on the planet, and they understood immediately what it was worth. Videla himself reportedly found football dull and barely watched it, but he understood its power completely. Within hours of seizing control, with the country under martial law, the junta found time to discuss the World Cup. They didn't see a tournament, they saw a stage. What the regime did next was turn the World Cup into the most expensive public relations operation in the country's history. They spent lavishly, over $520 million, which was roughly 10 times the original budget and nearly 4 times what Spain would spend to host 4 years later. New stadiums, upgraded infrastructure, television facilities to beam a perfect picture to the world. Scholars who've studied it are blunt about the purpose. This wasn't economic development, it was staging, an international spectacle built to mask state terror, and the staging was total. In the run-up to the tournament, poor neighborhoods near stadiums were bulldozed, their residents, hundreds of thousands of people, cleared out of sight of foreign eyes. The press was censored. Foreign journalists were shown a carefully managed version of the country, peaceful, orderly, modern. Military checkpoints filled the streets, but the message pumped out through state media was of a proud, united nation. When the tournament opened on the 1st of June 1978, Videla stood in the Monumental Stadium, the same stadium a short walk from the ESMA, and declared it a World Cup for peace. Hundreds of white doves were released into the sky. A national day off had been decreed so no Argentine would miss the moment, and as those doves rose out of the stadium, they could be seen from the ESMA, where, at that very time, thousands of prisoners were being held. It is one of the most chilling images in the history of sport, the symbol of peace, released directly over a place of terror. So the football began, and on the pitch, it was genuinely dramatic. Mario Kempes was electric. Argentina, roared on by delirious crowds, fought their way through. The country, starved of joy, living under curfews and fear, poured its heart into the team. But everything around the football was shadowed. The Dutch squad arrived amid boycott campaigns back home in Europe. Some players had faced real pressure not to come at all. Human rights groups like Amnesty International ran international campaigns throughout the tournament, publishing reports on the disappearances even as the matches played on. And the Argentine players themselves were, by their own later accounts, largely kept in the dark. Young men focused on the ball while the country burned quietly around them. Years later, midfielder Osvaldo Ardiles put it with painful honesty. It hurt, he said, to know that they had been used as a distraction, propaganda for the military, even as their victories gave genuinely oppressed people a rare reason to go outside and feel joy. There was also the match that has never stopped smelling wrong. In the second group stage, Argentina needed to beat Peru by 4 clear goals to reach the final. Before the game, General Videla himself visited the Peruvian dressing room to deliver a speech about Latin American brotherhood. Argentina won 6-0. Nothing has ever been proven, and Peru's players denied wrongdoing. And through it all, The tournament's most haunting fact: the disappearances did not stop for the football. Around 50 people were disappeared during the month of the World Cup itself. Among the first were two young men taken near the Monumental and the ESMA for handing out leaflets telling the truth about what was happening. The final came on the 25th of June, Argentina against the Netherlands. Kempes scored twice. Argentina won 3-1 in extra time, and the country exploded in celebration. The Dutch players left the pitch and did not return for the medal ceremony. Some later said they could not bring themselves to shake the dictator's hand, and in the ceremony that followed, the World Cup trophy passed from FIFA's president to General Videla, the head of the junta, who handed it to Argentina's captain. The regime had its perfect photograph, the world's greatest prize, presented under its flag, before a jubilant nation, broadcast to the entire planet. And less than a mile away, inside the ESMA, prisoners listened to the roars. Survivors have described watching or hearing the final in the presence of their own captors. One survivor, Graciela De Leo, later wrote of that day with a devastating simplicity. For the prisoners, Argentina's victory was also the regime's victory. If they won, she wrote, we lost. Some prisoners were even driven around the celebrating city that night by their guards, shown the flags, the joy, the crowds, as a message. Look how the country parties. Nobody is thinking about you. Nobody is coming. Two Argentinas existed that night, a few blocks apart, one dancing in the streets, one listening from behind walls. But the junta's perfect show had a flaw. The World Cup brought something to Argentina that the regime could not fully control: the world's cameras. Every Thursday, in the Plaza de Mayo in central Buenos Aires, a group of women marched in a slow circle, wearing white headscarves. They were the mothers of the Plaza de Mayo, mothers of the disappeared, demanding to know what had happened to their children. They had been marching for a year, mostly ignored, always in danger. During the World Cup, foreign journalists found them. While 70,000 people filled the stadium for the opening match, a Dutch journalist chose instead to go to the plaza and film the mothers. Those images, grieving women, white scarves, asking simply where are our children, traveled back to Europe. For many people around the world, it was the first time they had ever seen evidence of what was happening in Argentina. The junta had invited the world's media to film its triumph. Instead, some of them filmed the truth. The tournament meant to hide the crimes ended up helping expose them, and the mothers of the Plaza de Mayo became one of the most powerful human rights movements of the century, and history caught up. Videla was pushed out within a few years. The dictatorship collapsed in 1983 with the return of democracy. In the trials that followed, the junta's leaders were convicted of crimes against humanity. Videla died in prison in 2013, and the ESMA itself, the building beside the stadium, was turned into a memorial and museum. So, did the World Cup survive being hosted inside a dictatorship? The football survived, the trophy was lifted, the goals became legend, and Kempes' name went into history. On paper, 1978 is just another line in the record books. Argentina, champions. But the tournament's true legacy is the question it left behind, and it's a question football has never escaped, because 1978 proves something that regimes around the world took careful note of. The World Cup is powerful enough to launder an image, fill the stadiums, raise the trophy, flood the world's screens with joy, and for a month, the world might look away from anything. Every debate we have today about hosts, about politics and sport, about whether football should stay out of politics, it runs straight back through Buenos Aires, 1978. To a stadium roaring with real joy, and a building 10 blocks away holding real horror, and a regime that bet the noise of one would drown out the silence of the other. It almost worked, but not quite, because a handful of women in white headscarves kept walking in a circle every Thursday while the world was watching, and in the end, the world remembered them, long after it stopped celebrating the men who released the doves. Football is never just football. 1978 is the proof.